The Heels went 1-2 in Maui last week, but the time for defining how we feel about the non-con schedule, it begins now.
This is Tyler Hansbrough, and you're listening to Locked On Tar Heels.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? It's Monday, December 2nd, 2024. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade. You've joined me at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Special shout out to all you everydayers listening and watching, all the members of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, and of course, all our great Locked On Tar Heels insiders. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers, you can bet $5, and if you win, you get $150 back in bonus bets. Check it all out at FanDuel.com. That'll get you started. Okay, gang, coming up on the show today, it's kind of been a whirlwind of a week and weekend. We got the Mac Brown news we got to get into. Carolina has an interim head coach named for their bowl game, and all sorts of stuff going on. We've got our weekend whip around. Omarion Hampton still a beast. But first, I want to talk about the upcoming week for men's basketball, because I think we look back at what happened at Maui last week, and it's like, oh man, 1-2, already lost to Kansas. Things are bad. Things can't get better. And so what I want to do is kind of help contextualize where things are at right now so we can look at the week ahead, because this week is a very, very important week. You might recall I said, even going into Maui, hey, we're going to learn a lot about this team this week. And we did. I think that's very true. We learned a lot about where Carolina's strengths are last week. We learned a lot about where Carolina's deficiencies are, where their weaknesses are last week. But what's interesting is, because that's such a truncated time, because it's just like 3 games in 3 days, you don't have time to work on those weaknesses. You don't have time to practice like, okay, maybe we need to defend these ball screens better. Maybe we need to make this starting lineup change. Maybe we need to this or that or whatever it is. You don't have time for that while you're there in Maui, just subtle little things here and there. But now you've had time. You know, you finish playing on Wednesday, you fly home whenever it was, and then you don't play again till this Wednesday. That's been a luxury Carolina has not been afforded often in these kind of situations and settings. And then after that, you play again on Saturday, but both of these games are at home. So from a scheduling standpoint, Carolina's in a great spot. So what I want to say is, yes, last week was important from a learning about the team standpoint. This week, though, is where it all comes together. This is a critical stretch this week. There's only 2 games, one Wednesday and one Saturday, but they are very, very important. So great experiences last week. Now the key is to put the learning in this week. So where I'm at with it is, even though, as I said, you went 1-2 in Maui, even though you lost to Kansas, which, by the way, had Carolina held on to that win, it would have just made this game against Alabama on Wednesday night gravy, basically cherry on the top, because you would have had that win, but you don't. So it does put more pressure on this week. So the opportunity to define how we feel about, and more importantly, how the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee sees Carolina's non-conference portion of the schedule, is still ahead, is still to be defined. Because think about it, in the transfer portal era, man, so many teams are trying to figure out who they are. Not many teams are finished products. You know, you've got teams like Purdue and Marquette, who didn't bring in, they're literally the only 2 power conference schools that didn't bring in a single transfer. You've got other teams like Auburn that Carolina played last week that feels like a very fully formed version of themselves already. And the encouragement for me with Carolina is, you see some of the pieces and you know what some of it is, but this Carolina team, and I mean this as a compliment, as a good thing, has a long way to go to figure out who they are and what they are. But that key stretch takes place this week, and Carolina's got to take care of it. 1 non-conference game and 1 conference game. Yes, that's where we're at. Wednesday, hosting Alabama in the ACC SEC Challenge, and then Saturday, hosting Georgia Tech in that, you typically, since the ACC network debuted, there's been an early season ACC game every year. Well, it's less than a week away. That's this Saturday. And what's nice is you got these two games, and then you get a week off for exams before you play the next Saturday, and that's against LaSalle. That should be a nice ease back in from exam break. So there you go. Two key critical games right now. Now, what's interesting is this stretch that Carolina is in is essentially the exact same stretch as last year when we really started to see what Carolina was going to be. Here's what I mean. Carolina's MTE during Thanksgiving week last week was Battle for Atlantis, which is actually at the back end of the week. This one was at the front end of the week, gives Carolina more time. And then they played Tennessee on, I believe it was Wednesday in the ACC SEC Challenge at home, throttled Tennessee. You remember that? Tennessee made a valiant push at the end, but Carolina dominated that basketball game. And then that Saturday, Carolina had their very first ACC game at home against Florida State. That was the game where Carolina was down pretty big and then came back with a vengeance and beat Florida State, kind of similar to how the Michigan State game played out in the NCAA tournament last year. That's the exact same stretch of the season we're in. Battle for Atlantis, Maui. Tennessee at home, ACC SEC Challenge, Bama this week. Florida State at home to kick off ACC play. Georgia Tech at home to kick off ACC play. And that's where things are at right now. And remember, at that point, last year's Carolina team only had one loss. It was the Villanova loss in overtime of Battle for Atlantis. But still ahead was Kentucky and UConn. Carolina lost those games back to back. With all due respect to Florida and UCLA, who, by the way, Florida is much better than expected. Carolina has already, once you get past the Bama game, played the toughest portion of their non-conference schedule, facing Kansas and Auburn, whom, by the time you're watching to or listening to this today, watching or listening to this, I guess I should get that right. You probably already know the new rankings, but I think in my rankings, Auburn and Kansas are 1 and 2 this week. That's where we're at right now. And so, Carolina's in a different spot this year in terms of difficulty of schedule, where the most difficult parts of the non-con schedule will be behind Carolina after Alabama on Wednesday. As for the Alabama game, man, we were talking in the Locked On Tar Heels Discord on Sunday about how critical is this game? Is it a must win? Where is it at? I tend to feel like it is from a resume standpoint, that Carolina needs this game from an elite resume game that stays with you the rest of the season. I think Florida would carry a lot of cachet. That's going to be a very difficult game. UCLA should be a tough game, but not as much as Florida will be. But from like every selection committee member is going to look at this win and be like, whoa, that's a big time win, like the Kansas win would have been, for example. And so with this Bama game, there's that side of it, just from a resume standpoint, like your last elite non-conference opportunity. But then also just because of the Bama of it all lately, losing Jaron Stevenson recruitment battle, losing the 4 overtime game to them in PK 85, losing to them last year in the NCAA tournament. It's just like, just got to win this game. And I'm a little nervous the players are going to press a little bit, the guys that were around, because they want it so badly. But they just need to settle in and play Wednesday night. And we'll obviously preview that game later in the week, but that's going to be a critical game. And again, because when you hate to compare it to last year, but you kind of can't help it. That was the game last year where we really saw all that Carolina could be and do as they came out and because remember going into that game, it was like, I don't know, Tennessee, ooh, they look really good. And then Carolina did work on them. That's what's got to happen Wednesday. And then the Georgia Tech game Saturday, again, as we think about how critical this week is, you got to start off ACC play with a win, especially because similar to last year, the very beginning of the main chunk of ACC play is on the road. Let me scroll down to it really quick on the schedule here. Florida, UCLA, Campbell. So at Louisville on New Year's Day, at Notre Dame on Saturday, January 4th, before home against SMU. So the first 2 games of the main chunk of ACC play, both on the road. And so you really got to get this Georgia Tech game And you got to make up for last year's loss in Atlanta where they didn't call that foul where RJ was fouled right at the end of the game. Very frustrating. And by the way, speaking of Tennessee, let's remember the Vols last year. Went 1-2 in Maui against a very tough bracket, then came to Chapel Hill and lost to Carolina. So they went on this stretch of like going 1 of 3 in a stretch of 4 games. And yet they went on to have a phenomenal season. They won the SEC regular season and they were a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. Part of that was because of how difficult their non-conference schedule was. So again, don't get all worried about Carolina going 1-2 in Maui. Things can be okay. Will they be? That's yet to be determined, but they're in a good spot with a lot to learn. So the questions become, as we get to Wednesday and playing Alabama, what, if any, adjustments will we see? And there better be. I really hope I don't have to have that if any in my question. What I really want to just say, what adjustments will we see? Will it be lineup? Will it be schematic? Will it be pick and roll defense? Will it be just simply mindset changes to be like Coach Rob said on the show last week, to hate to give up a bucket and anything like that? Like, what are these changes going to be? Really curious to see as Carolina faces Alabama on Wednesday. So much more on that as we get into the rest of the week. Well, Carolina named an interim head coach for football for the bowl game. That in itself is telling. Carolina's going to play in a bowl game. And we'll get to all that, my thoughts on it. And, man, Kamen Rucker, classy guy. I'll talk about why in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook because right now, new customers can bet $5, and if you win, you get $150 back in bonus bets. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more right there on the same page where you place your bets. The Carolina-Alabama line isn't out yet, so I went ahead and looked at a couple other things. The one I checked out for today was Final Four odds to make the Final Four at FanDuel. Carolina's odds right now are plus 950. There are multiple teams ahead of them. So if you think those steeper odds are good and you want to get in on it, man, go check it all out. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. On Sunday, North Carolina put out a press release that they had named Freddie Kitchens as the interim head coach for the North Carolina Tar Heels. We'll talk about Kitchens, just a couple things about him here in a second. But first, what this reveals to me, a couple things here. Number one, this tells me probably the biggest thing, that the head coach that they want, like the guy, isn't available yet. Here's what I mean. If the head coach that Carolina wanted was already available, they would have just gone ahead and done it, because everything we're reading between the lines with Coach Brown suggests that this has been a thing for a while. It's been a known thing that they wanted to do. And Bubba, I'm sure, has his guy in his head, right? Like, they're going to go through the interviews and do all that, but he's got a guy that he wants, has to. And so what we learned from this, in my opinion, is that by naming an interim rather than a head coach, they can't yet get the person they want. And that person, it could be another head coach at the collegiate or NFL level. It could be another coordinator at the collegiate or NFL level. However, if it was a coordinator, I would imagine that you could go ahead and move on that. Oftentimes, we see if a coordinator is hired to a head coaching position, that they will go ahead and move even during bowl season a lot of times. And then somebody else will step in to be that team's coordinator in their bowl game. Now, maybe it's a team, whoever Bubba Cunningham wants, that's in a conference championship game. So they're waiting till after that this coming weekend. If so, I get that. But what I believe is that if it's a coordinator, you would probably be able to go ahead and move on it. If it's a sitting head coach for another team, then it makes sense to me that that would not happen until after that team season is completely done. And so that's what we're watching for. Another thing that the Freddie Kitchens interim tag tells me is that Carolina is going to play in their bowl game. Because if not, why bother naming an interim for right now? Just to have a figurehead on it? No, you would just roll and be fine, whatever. Now, interestingly, the press release doesn't specifically say Freddie Kitchens named interim head coach for the bowl game. Just says that he's been named interim head coach. So they do leave some wiggle room there of like, if they're not going to participate, maybe not. Like there was some talk coming out of Saturday in the little melee at the end of the game there that a bunch of Tar Heels would be suspended and not able to play in a bowl game anyway. So, there's some potential legitimacy to that. However, by the very naming of an interim head coach, whoever it was, tells me that Carolina will play in whatever bowl game they receive the invite to. One other thing that is a takeaway to me from all this, listen to Bubba Cunningham's statement about hiring Freddie Kitchens or putting the interim tag on Freddie Kitchens. He says, quote, Freddie Kitchens is an incredibly talented coach who is respected by our student athletes and staff. He is dedicated to doing all he can to help lead our program through this transition, and we appreciate his willingness to take on this role, end quote. What I take away from that quote, again, I'm always reading between the lines with the things we pick up on, is that Freddie Kitchens is only in that interim role for such a time as this. I do not believe they will consider him for the long-term candidate, and here's why. Listen to this phrasing. He is dedicated to doing all he can to help lead our program through this transition. If it was somebody that they were looking at with legitimacy, it might say something like, he is dedicated to doing all he can to help lead our program through this transition and beyond, or through this transition and into the future. There ain't no mention of anything beyond this. And maybe that's Bubba just holding his cards close to his vest. Maybe it's just not wanting to commit to something they don't know about yet. But to me, that's just like you wouldn't even need to put any sort of phrase in there that indicates that, unless you're saying, hey, he's just leading us through this, and then we're on to whomever's next. And even his final comment after that, and we appreciate his willingness to take on this role. That role being leading us through this transition. That's it. That's, to me, we can pull that out and say, yeah, that's a thing. So those are kind of my big takeaways from Freddie Kitchens being named interim. That the person they actually want's not available. Carolina will play in their bowl game, and Freddie Kitchens is not being considered for the long-term role. So that's what you got. As for Freddie Kitchens, who is he? Remind me, Isaac. I can't remember. He's the run game coordinator and the tight end coach. He's been in that role for the past 2 seasons, came to Carolina in February of 2023. Went to Bama. He's a Bama grad, has had 8 gajillion coaching stops in his career, multiple positions within the same organizations or schools, but has had stops with the Cowboys, the Arizona Cardinals, the Giants, all at the NFL level. He was the Browns head coach for 1 year in 2019. When he came to Carolina, he actually came from South Carolina, where he was there, a senior analyst there on staff for the Gamecocks. And so that's, kind of his pedigree, and he knows the deal and knows what he's getting into. And that, I had said last week, I would like to see it be Jeff Collins be named the interim if they do that. But I understand not naming either he or Chip Lindsey and instead naming somebody else. That makes sense so that you don't upset that balance ahead of the bowl game. So we will keep our eyes on that. Funny enough, did you see, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, there was a rumor floating around Sunday. I have the person that floated it to me, it was given as legitimate information from reliable sources. I'm not going to push it on that way because I've not been able to verify that, but I do think it's funny. And so I want to say that apparently Bill Belichick has some interest in this role. Yes, that Bill Belichick. I cannot see him coaching in college. I cannot see him doing stuff, but I mean, who knows? It's a wild ride, and let's get on it and hold on for dear life. Is where things are at with that. But ultimately, you had to do something. So I'm glad they got Coach Kitchens, but you got to name your full-time guy sooner rather than later so you can retain current players or at least work on it. retain high school commits that are committed to Carolina, those who haven't left already, and then get to work in the portal, because that's so critically important for what you got to do, especially on a quick turnaround. So, and ultimately, this whole thing with the way it was handled with Coach Brown, I just don't like it, man. It did not feel befitting for a coach of his stature that's been around so long, that's done so much for this university, that loves this university. It just felt like, and Coach Brown referenced this in his post game after NC State the other day, like, but we could have done this with a joint press conference. It didn't have to go down this way. And I think that's just the bummer. And at least publicly, because he's such a classy individual, he's not letting that show through his frustration. But I bet it's boiling below the surface pretty real that he is frustrated. So that's a bummer to me. I'm disappointed in that. And I think it could have been handled better and more carefully for a coaching legend. One other football thing I want to say here, and then we'll talk a little bit of Omarion Hampton and the weekend whip around in a minute. I want to go back to the Cayman Rucker hit one more time, where he was taken out of this game, cracked his fibula. So I put it up on, I tweeted it, put it out for God and all the world to see. And here's what I said with the video. This is straight up dirty from NC State's number 52. Rolls right up on Cayman Rucker's ankle on a cut block. UNC's best defensive player is probably done for the day. I tweeted that out in real time before we knew that he actually was going to be done for the day. And I got to tell you, man, people have dived all on this. Everybody, like from Carolina fans to NC State fans, have been wanting to talk about it. But what I want to point out, and Cayman Rucker himself quote tweeted, and that's why I said a little bit ago that he's so classy, because forget his phrasing of it, but basically was like, hey, dirty or not dirty, it happened. That's football, and I'm going to heal and I'm going to get back better. And so he's a much classier individual than I am in his handling of it. But what's interesting is NC State fans are all in my mentions about it was a clean block and blah, 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 blah. Or not clean. It was a legal block. And very specifically, I said nothing about the legality or illegality of this block. I just said it was dirty, because we all know this. If you've ever played a sport, if you've ever been around a sport, you know that there are dirty plays you can do that are legal within the rules of the game, but that are still considered dirty and not like gentleman's agreement or ladies agreement or whatever it is, right? And this is that. Again, I said nothing about this being a legal cut block or not, which is hilarious because people are all in my mentions debating the finer intricacies of the rules of cut blocks and what's allowed and what's not. I'm not even pretending to try to argue that right now. Literally all I was saying, this is dirty and there's no room for it, and we can't live for that. So I just thought that was very, very funny. But here's what I appreciate. There was at least one NC State fan that commented on our live postcast from after the game that said, quote, "Us State fans don't like Dave Doran either," end quote. And I was just like, you know what? Somebody out there gets it. There's at least one sane NC State fan that's like, I don't like it, but we're stuck with it, so we're rolling with it. But none of me have to like him. And so thank you for that. And here's my other thing with the frustration of Cayman Rucker being taken out of this game. NC State scored on literally every possession of the second half. Literally every time they touched the ball, they scored. And in a game where Carolina lost by just 5 points. You cannot tell me that if Cayman Rucker had been in this game, Carolina couldn't have stopped them at least once in the second half on a touchdown drive. And that's all it would have taken, and Carolina would have won. That's frustrating. That's very frustrating. And I know that NC State could say the same thing about Howard Sampson's hit on their kid Cisse that took him out of the game, who's their best corner. I hear that. But I'm just looking at the Carolina side of things. And with Rucker in the game, it changes that dynamics. It just simply does. And there's all there is to that. But Carolina lost. They didn't win. Things happen. And so we have to move on. Sticking with football, though, Omarion Hampton has been an absolute stud these past 2 seasons. You got to make sure you don't miss it. And this man is etching his name further and further into the record book. We'll get to that and the weekend whip around all coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about game time, you guys, college basketball season is here, man. I love the energy. I love the who knows what's going to happen when you go to a game like Wednesday night when Bama comes in. Man, all bets are off. When Georgia Tech comes to campus on Saturday for this first ACC game, man, once conference action kicks up, it's crazy. You never know what's going to happen. And you need to make sure you get in the door and you get to these games. And the great news is that when you want to do so, Game Time Picks is there for you to help make getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. What it does, Game Time Picks, it filters out the fluff to show you just the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to spend your time wading through everything else. And it's also not just for sports. You can get concerts, comedy theater, and so much more. Literally this weekend on Saturday, I bought tickets for something for my family that wasn't a sports-related thing. And I'm so excited. I'm so thankful to Game Time for how great of an app it is to help me navigate that and purchase it. I love that I was able to click on all-in prices, and I knew completely exactly what each ticket was going to cost before I got nickeled and dimed on the back end of this, and not nickeled and dimed, $1 and $50, whatever. And so I love that they have that feature as well. So whether it's Game Time ticket coverage, lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat right there in the app, Game Time's got you covered, man. I found tickets to that Alabama-Carolina game for as low as $34. Obviously, it can go up from there, but you can get in the door for under $40 to this thing, man. Go check it out. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? Game time. Even though Saturday afternoon just didn't go the way we wanted to, man, Omarion Hampton got back to form after a slow day for him at Boston College last Saturday. This is 22 carries, 185 yards on the ground for Omarion Hampton, working to make up in big measure for what happened up in Boston last week. What this all means is that Omarion Hampton this season has 1,660 rushing yards. That is the second. Now he's moved into second place past some guy named Omarion Hampton. He is now second all-time on the single-season rushing list for Carolina, behind only Don McCauley, who had 1,720 in 1970. So right now, Omarion is 60 yards behind, tying McCauley for first place. And man, this is so sad because Omarion is so close to getting this record. And it's a bummer. Remember, he missed the whole second half and some of the first half of that Charlotte game. And in that game, he already had 77 yards in less than a half. You got to think he'd probably get 61 more yards in that one. And now he would be the record holder if that was the case. It was a bummer to have one atypical game last week, the only game that he finished this year where he did not have 100 or more rushing yards. That's tough, man. It's a bummer. But as things stand right now, he needs just 61 yards to break the record. So the question is, will he play in Carolina's bowl game? Is there any world, and I don't think there is, but is there any world in which he decides to come back for one more go at this thing? You know, like, hey, we got a new coach coming in and I want to help navigate the ship. I just don't see it, especially because he's a running back and the shelf life for running backs is so small. He's got to go and make his mark in the NFL while he can, get paid while he can, because every year matters. And so I think ultimately he's gone. And so I think the question is, will he play in Carolina's bowl game? If so, there's this balance of like, Omarion doesn't strike me as the type of guy who would play in the bowl game just to try and get this record, right? Like, that's just not him. It doesn't seem like anyway. But on the other hand, he doesn't strike me as the guy that would want to opt out of a bowl game. He strikes me as the type of guy that's like, no, screw it. I'm playing in this game. And if I just so happen to get 61 yards, fine, whatever. I want to play in this game and help my team win. We'll ultimately see what happens because I understand it. You can't risk injury and you can't do other things like that. But man, what an absolute bonkers 2 years it's been for Omarion Hampton. So special. Sam Howell previously and then Drake May the last 2 years have really covered up a lot of Carolina's warts where you just didn't see them as much because they were such studs. This year, and truthfully last year, that was Omarion Hampton. He was the wart coverer this year. Single season now. Omarion Hampton is the owner of 2 of the 3 best single season rushing performances in Carolina history. Don McCauley had 1,720 in 1970, and then Hampton this year has 1,660, last year 1,504. So said another way, only 3 times in the entire history of North Carolina football has a player rushed for over 1,500 yards. Omarion Hampton is the owner of 2 of those 3 seasons. That's what we're talking about. This dude has been absolutely crazy. And then career numbers. He's up to 622 rushes for 3,565 yards. Let me give you that top list. Number 1, Amos Lawrence, 4,391. 2, Mike Voigt, 3,971. Number 3, Leon Johnson, 3,693. And then Omarion Hampton, 4th on the all-time Carolina rushing list, 3,565. If he plays in this bowl game, he's got an outside shot to overtake Leon Johnson for 30. He's about 140 behind him. No, 130-ish behind him. That's very doable for Omarion Hampton. And the thing is, this year is even more impressive than what he's done in the past because he doesn't have Drake May to complement him. It's just the passing attack hasn't been as dynamic and explosive as it was last year, taking so much of the attention off of Omarion. This year it's just been like, oh, make somebody else beat you. Well, you can't because he's that good. So special season, just wanted to talk about it. A couple other quick things. Number 1, you might have seen, just wanted to make sure that Carolina lost out on Kendra Harrison, the 2-sport athlete, number 1 tight end in the nation for 2026, and also a top basketball recruit. But his is a football first recruitment where that's the thing that matters more. And so unfortunately he picked Oregon. This kid that's seemingly a homebody is picking Oregon. And so I said it at the time when we last previewed it, and I want to say it again. Do not get all up in this young man's mentions, yelling at him and cursing him out and telling him what a disgrace to the state of North Carolina is. That ain't it, y'all. Especially in this day and age where a couple things could happen. When the new coach comes in, whoever that is, I bet he's going to reach out to Kendra Harrison and figure out just how solid that commitment is. Going to try to start working that angle. And then secondly, the other thing is, it's the transfer portal era, baby. He could play a year at Oregon and be like, I want to go home, and we'll just welcome and ride on back. But when we start saying negative things and getting into his comments on social media and all that, it doesn't help. So just don't do it. And we'll see if Kendra Harrison might come back around. All right, quickly, weekend whip around. Women's basketball destroyed NC Central on Friday, 119-43. Let me just give you a few things. Most single game points of the Courtney Banghart era, 119. Most single game assists of the Courtney Banghart era, 28. Most single game blocks of the Courtney Banghart era, 11. Carolina scored at least 25 points in each quarter, and NC Central never scored more than 13 in a quarter. Tar Heels led 34-12 after one quarter. 12 Tar Heels played, and they all scored at least 5 points. They were led by Alyssa Usby's 24 points, and she had a 24-point, 10-rebound double-double in just 21 minutes. Crazy stuff. Oh, and she just chipped in 4 assists, no turnovers, 3 blocks, and 2 steals to go along with it. That's a stat line. Now, I don't care what competition it's against. 6 total Tar Heels in double figures in total. Maria Gakdang, good to see her back in action, and had her own double-double, 10 points, 11 boards. Great stuff there. Tar Heels are now 7-1. They're on a 4-game winning streak, but next up, a big-time matchup. They host Kentucky, number 14 in the nation, for the women's version of the ACC-SEC Challenge. That's Thursday at 5 at home. Cats are 7-0. Remember, Kenny Brooks, the former Virginia Tech coach, is there now. Took Georgia Amore with him. And Tiani Key is on this team, and she's playing very well herself. Women's soccer, yes, let's go on to the College Cup, which is soccer's Final Four. They beat number 22 Penn State 2-1 in overtime Friday night at Dorrance Field. Beautiful corner. Kate Fossey gets it in, and the Tar Heels are off to the Final Four. So College Cup starts Friday in Cary. Heels, you ready? Can your heart handle this again? Play number 1 Duke at 7:30 p.m. on ESPNU. Remember, they've played 3 times already this season. Duke won at Duke in a non-conference battle earlier this season. Duke won at Carolina to end the regular season. And then the Tar Heels repaid the favor and won in the ACC semifinal. So who's going to get this one? Man, we're going to find out. Here's the crazy thing about the College Cup, the women's Final Four. It's made up of entirely ACC teams, obviously Carolina and Duke. And then the other side of the bracket is Wake and Stanford. They'll play earlier on Friday. If the Tar Heels win, the championship is next Monday, December 9th, a week from today at 7:00 p.m. Volleyball won 3-0 at Clemson. They finished their regular season 22-7, 14-6 overall. There is no conference tournament in volleyball, and I just remembered that the selection show was just a little bit ago before I'm recording this. So in real time, we're going to find together how the ladies did, where they land in the NCAA tournament. This is going to be fun. Stick with me here really quick. Volleyball. Time to dance. Volleyball heads to the NCAA tournament for the 20th time in program history, and they will play Yale on Friday at a time yet to be determined. So that'll be the first round matchup, Carolina against Yale at Penn State. So that's what's going on Friday. Congrats to the ladies. Other than that, it was pretty a slow weekend. Literally no events on Sunday. Football was the only thing on Saturday. Wrestling was off this weekend, will be for a couple weeks. Swimming and diving was off. They've got stuff upcoming this week. And then many of the fall sports are done, right? Like field hockey lost in the Final Four. Men's soccer lost in the first round. Cross country already had their national championships. And tennis has finished their fall stuff. So we're almost solely into the winter stuff. Just a few more things to wrap up with volleyball and soccer. And that'll be that. All right, guys, thanks for joining me to kick off a brand new week of Locked On Tar Heels. It's great to be together. I hope you had a great weekend. Man, we all got to start running, get off all that Thanksgiving extra poundage that we put on. I've been eating like crazy. You probably have too. If you haven't subscribed to the show on YouTube or on audio, make sure you do that so you don't miss a second. If you've not joined the Locked On Tar Heels Discord or the Locked On Tar Heels Insiders, those links are in the show notes. A great way to join and be even deeper part of the show beyond just being a listener or a viewer, man. We'd love to have you interacting with the rest of us. All right, guys, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll be back again tomorrow, but until then, peace.